You're listening to Speaking Of by WFSU Public Media. Last year, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection approved a draft permit for a company to drill an exploratory well near the Apalachicola River. Recently, a judge ruled the state should have rejected the permit and said the department did not adequately consider the sensitive nature of the area. Craig Diamond is a board member with Apalachicola Riverkeeper, the nonprofit advocacy group that successfully challenged the permit. He is sitting down with Gina Jordan to discuss recent developments.
Hi, I'm Gina Jordan, a host at WFSU Public Media, and today we are speaking of an oil drilling bill that both sides of the political aisle like.
We don't have to choose between energy security and food security. We can have both. This bill does that.
That was Jacksonville Republican Representative Dean Black, who says we should support oil exploration for national security reasons. But he likes this bill as it seeks to protect the Apalachicola River and Bay from oil and gas drilling. A key lawmaker behind the proposal is Port St. Joe Republican Representative Jason Shove, whose family has been in the natural gas business for decades.
But I also felt that put it on my plate and made it my responsibility to run this bill. No one can say that I'm not a big fan of the industry. In Apalachicola, we have an area of critical state concern. The Bay the Apalachicola Bay and the Keys are really so close in sensitivity. It's hard to explain unless you've been there, unless you live there, unless you really give it an opportunity to get to know it. We have a company that has come in, and I'm not blaming them. They believe there's oil there, so they went after permits to be able to explore. Well, of course, the way it all went down, here we are today, and this bill is going to put an end to oil exploration and drilling
In Apalachicola Bay, and we'll get more into this shortly. But first, an administrative law judge says the state should have rejected a permit for a Louisiana-based company to drill for oil near the Apalachicola River. The judge says the Florida Department of Environmental Protection did not adequately consider the sensitive nature of that area. The nonprofit advocacy group Apalachicola Riverkeeper filed a challenge last year after the department issued a draft permit for an exploratory well in an unincorporated part of Calhoun County. To get into all of this, we have WFSU ecology blog producer Rob Diaz de Villegas and Craig Diamond on the board of directors for Apalachicola Riverkeeper. Thank you both for being here.
Good morning.
Thanks, Gina.
Craig, DEP approved this exploration for a site that is within the 100-year floodplain of the Apalachicola River and within a mile of two ponds connected to the river. What can you tell us about the lawsuit and the ruling?
Thanks, Gina. We're thrilled with the ruling. I think the judge got it exactly right and pointed out DEP's deficiencies in its review. It took a very limited and effectively ham-handed approach to the information that had been provided in the application and its traditional understanding of what a floodplain is in particular. So they looked at the drilling site effectively as a postage stamp of slightly elevated dirt in the larger 100-year floodplain of the Apalachicola River, which within the Riverkeeper suit we had made a very clear statement to the effect that this is in the floodplain. It's affected by floodwaters, and a lot of the lawsuit details revolved around the need for Clearwater, the drilling company, to make significant modifications, to recognize the need for, and then make significant modifications to its control system, both for blowouts and spills, as well as just simply for flooding of the site as a whole. So DEP had roughly glossed over a lot of that and really didn't take it into full account in their decision to provide the permit in the first place.
And we should note that state government has really long been trying to protect the river and Apalachicola Bay. They're part of that Apalachicola-Chattahoochee-Flint River system. And while this is a different issue, for those that have heard of the Tri-State Water Wars for years, that system starts in North Georgia, it goes into Alabama, and it ends in Apalachicola Bay in Franklin County. So do you have a guess for why DEP approved that permit?
I think they lost track of the context. of really the situation that the river and the bay find itself in. You made an appropriate point that we have got the longstanding water wars and the decades-long pressure affecting the ecological health of the bay and the floodplain. Tupelo trees have been lost, affecting the honey industry. We've had the effect of collapse, and we're still waiting for appropriate conditions to reopen the bay for oyster harvesting, which is potentially scheduled late this fall. But FWC still recognizes that the health of the system is not really there yet. It's not ready for prime time economically.
Yeah. Rob, I know you've seen these areas. You've done a lot of work over there. Just, I guess, give us a feel for what things are like now compared to maybe what they used to be before we had these water issues.
Right. Well, I've seen them how they are now. There's been research, I guess, that I, on my first river trek, actually, we had a talk by a U.S. Geological Survey researcher who had done this decades-long study of Tupelo swamps in the Apalachicola River Basin. And so they did a tree survey in the late 70s, 1978 through 2006. And it's a 30% decline in the floodplain forest trees, but especially hard hit was the Ogeechee Tupelo, which is where we get the Tupelo honey. It's a 44% loss of the overstory trees, and then something closer to like a 70% loss of those younger trees that are supposed to come in behind them. So this floodplain has been really thinned. And this is where we're talking about where the drilling is. This area between the Apalachicola and Chipola rivers, where a lot of waterways connect the two. I think Dan Tonsmeyer, former riverkeeper, said, the river's 106 miles long. And then with all the sloughs and creeks come off into the floodplain, it's about 400 miles of waterway. And that's what's in there connecting everything. Yeah.
And Representative Schoaf was really clear in saying we have to consider economies. He kept talking about the BP oil spill and how the oil didn't even make it into the bay, and it ruined so many businesses. And that's another reason why he's pushing this bill that the legislature is talking about.
Oil spill had significant impacts on Florida Bay. I mean, the Panhandle still had tar balls from the BP spill. Louisiana oyster industry is completely wiped out. Should you go to New Orleans and get oysters down in Canal Street somewhere, you're not going to be getting Louisiana oysters. They're coming in from Texas, which was far less affected. So that spill and then the threat that this drilling may have proposed or imposed on the bay is something that I think Representative Schoaf's bill, co-sponsored with Representative Tant and then carried through on the Senate side by Corey Simon, really made it clear that Florida needs to look out for its own. And I think those bills had an appropriately nuanced approach by highlighting those areas that the state and the federal government find to be uniquely sensitive within Florida.
Yeah. Yeah, this is definitely one of those uniquely bipartisan bills that everyone seems to be interested in. Wrapping up our talk about this ruling, the judge wrote that DEP abdicated its duty in this case to assess the situation, said essentially if DEP had done what it was supposed to, that permit would never have been approved. So now this decision means the case goes back to DEP for a final order. So how does this play out?
Historically, I think DEP has followed the administrative law judge's findings. This was a really clear case. There wasn't a whole lot of points where the state won or Clearwater won. Riverkeeper won on all key points. So, DEP would be wise to go ahead and go back in and deny this particular permit. Now, to be clear, that does not preclude Clearwater from coming back in with a new, better, and improved permit, learning all the lessons that it might have gotten from this particular experience.
Oh, interesting. So, yeah, the battle may not be over there.
Yeah, the judge pointed out numerous deficiencies in the application and in the review process in terms of the changes that were made repeatedly and told DEP if there were this many changes, you should have just simply held up, waited for a clean application, and then applied the rules and statutes appropriately rather than doing it stop and go along the way. And so this, in a sense, resets the clock for all the players.
Okay, well, let's talk about the bill now in the legislature that would take the decision away from DEP in certain circumstances. So the bill initially called for banning oil and gas drilling within 10 miles of the state's 3 national estuarine research reserves including the Apalachicola Reserve. The other two are in St. Augustine and in Naples.
Right.
But the Senate made a change so that the 10-mile rule would only apply in counties designated by the governor as rural areas of opportunity. So the final bill now only applies to areas around the Apalachicola River and Bay in Gulf, Franklin, Liberty, and Calhoun counties. So,
Those counties are all part of the Northwest Rural Area of Opportunity. This is an existing designation. The current designation, they run for about 5 years each, would come up, I believe, for redesignation on July 8th. It's a governor's order that stipulates that these are in play. The Rural Area Program is under the auspices of the READY, the Rural Economic Development Initiative in Florida. There's 16 state agencies plus the water manager districts that all partner together on their programs to prioritize economic development for rural counties. And these special sub-areas receive additional benefits and considerations under the various programs that all of those 16-plus READY agencies participate in. So, yes, the bill would go ahead, effectively exclude those two other estuarine research reserves because they are not within counties that are a rural area of opportunity, however the Northwest is. And so it would apply here. The 10-mile limit that had been in Representative Schoaf's bill is still intact and would certainly cover the vast majority of the floodplain within Calhoun County where the current exploratory well was under the permit consideration.
Mm-hmm. So this bill passed the House, then the Senate changed it a little and passed it, and now it needs House approval again. So the bill also calls for DEP to use a balancing test to determine potential risks to natural resources before issuing drilling permits near water bodies. But DEP is already supposed to do that, correct?
Yes. And in particular, Apalachicola River is an outstanding Florida water. There is a higher standard for the OFW waters of the state in terms of that balancing test. It's always a balancing test when a permit's being considered. Do the natural resources there dictate a higher level of consideration in whether to issue the permit or the type of conditions that would be attached to a permit. So again, as you had noted earlier, the judge found that DEP was effectively derelict in doing its initial balancing test. Whether the bill as proposed really would require DEP to deeply look at things differently isn't clear to me personally, but it's nice to have that added layer and a reminder to the agency that you must follow the statute as laid out and any rules that may come about that define more explicitly what the criteria are for that balancing test.
Mm-hmm. Here's Representative Schoaf talking more about that.
This balancing act will give DEP the clarity it needs, and it tells them that they should consider all of these extra factors before permitting is allowed to drill anywhere near any waterway. We want them to pay attention to the potential impacts to the environment, the potential impacts to the economy, things that aren't necessarily front and center on their order that we've given them.
But, Rob, people will be the ones determining this, and it's subjective, right? Like, we can give them a clear test, but it winds up being subjective, don't you think? In terms of people who would actually have to go out and look with their own eyes, maybe talk to business owners. He's talking about the economy, how many people are going to be impacted by this? And really, are they being put through steps to say, these are the criteria?
I mean, I guess if you can establish that, that's connected to every waterway that's below that and every economy that's connected to that. And it's everything from tourism to Tupelo honey and all the way down into the Bay and the seafood industry. And, we talked about the economic opportunities in rural counties. Some of these counties are very much tied to the river and the Bay and the floodplain for their economic well-being.
Yeah.
So if you can establish that that's all connected, then obviously everything downstream of it would be affected.
Yeah.
To that point, and this was made clear in the judge's ruling, again, DEP really didn't think about outside the box about what was downstream of where a spill may affect. They looked at the perimeter of the control berm around the drilling pad, and that was the entire universe. They did go through their checklist. Are there endangered species? Well, there were no endangered species inside the berm on a pad. There was no habitat there for it. So when it came to looking at environmental impacts, DEP was looking with a microscope. The judge made it really clear that they needed to be using a telescope or a microscope to go ahead and actually see what was going on.
Yeah.
Interestingly, in the case, the economic analysis that was presented by Clearwater's own experts as well as Riverkeepers made clear that everyone was looking at it much more broadly, that the entire economy and that the scope of drilling necessary to justify the effort that Clearwater was intending to commit to were they to be successful was going to be multiple square miles. So, well, if DEP is only looking at the drilling pad of a single site, they don't get to go ahead and have it both ways and say, oh, economically we're going to look at multiple square miles, but we're only going to look at a postage stamp for environmental impacts. So the judge made that very clear that you need to use the same metrics when you're looking at what a permit will do.
Yeah.
And you mentioned endangered species, so maybe not within that smaller area, but downstream we're talking about things like mussels, sturgeon. What else is in that delta area, I guess, downstream of there?
FWC, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, did provide DEP a letter documenting the breadth of species that might be affected by a spill, and DEP ignored it, just didn't bother to go ahead and use it.
I haven't read the legislation. These things tend to be very lengthy and wordy, but as far as any specific criteria, have you guys seen any criteria laid out for DEP in that bill?
I apologize. That's one thing I've not memorized.
Yeah. Well, he talks about that it will clearly give them, Representative Schoaf says, they will clearly have some criteria to work with. So if the bill makes it through, we'll see.
Again, it's statutory language. A lot of times the staff in the field do need more explicit words to pin down exactly what they look at and how they look at it.
Yeah. Well, the issue has gotten broad bipartisan support. Here's Republican Jacksonville Representative Dean Black again. He was speaking in committee before the bill changed to only impact Apalachicola Bay.
We should generally be supportive of oil exploration and the development of it because energy security is national security. But we should also recognize so is food security. Striking the right balance between those two strategic imperatives is important in this state as in the rest of the nation. I believe this bill achieves that balance. The passage of this bill will help protect areas that are integral to our ability to produce seafood domestically, while at the same time achieving a balance in oil exploration and development.
So he hits on a number of points there. He talks about how the bill is good for energy security and food security. Anybody want to weigh in on that?
Well, the energy security aspect of it is addressed by the fact that the bill only protects the 3 estuarine research reserves, which are all important nurseries. Apalachicola is a huge nursery for the Gulf. So the food security is limited in scope just to the service that these particular research reserves and the buffer that would surround them provide. The energy security aspect is still left wide open for the entire coastline of the state of Florida to potentially be subject to exploration and drilling.
Yeah. He also talks about how this protects tourism, seafood, and agriculture workers. And we know that the seafood industry certainly took a hit along the bay. I guess in some places, my understanding is that they have bounced back, but in some places, they still haven't.
Well, the oysters, I mean, if you look at what FWC put out when they talk about, and December is, I think, the deadline, that's when the moratorium on oyster harvesting will expire. Based on their 2022 data, I think 5% of the historic reefs have oysters in them. And a lot of that, they say in their data, is it's low-density oysters. So I don't think we can expect pre-2012 oyster harvests from Apalachicola Bay come December.
Yeah. So now we wait to find out whether the House will take that bill up again with these changes. Do you think some lawmakers might be unhappy about a more limited scope?
I don't think that they will be unhappy with it. If anything, other interests in the state are now inadvertently protected by that restriction really to the northwest rural area of opportunity. I have to think that you highlighted the bipartisan nature. The House bill went through 2 committees and then on the floor vote passed 116 to 0. So folks clearly recognize the coarse intent of the bill and what it's attempting to achieve and to reflect the balance. So there's not a whole lot of dissension in the ranks over the value of the bill as it's currently framed. In the Senate, it went through 3 committees, 2 of them unanimous, and on the third vote, there was 1 vote that was a nay, and I think it was an accident. I've reached out to the senator and have not heard back to find out how that happened, or if there was a real good basis for voting against it.
Yeah.
But in any sense, statewide, the entire legislature is entirely on board with the fundamentals of the bill. And, the fine-tuning at the last minute that doesn't have a significant impact and really, if nothing else, achieves even more so what the bill is intended to accomplish because it was driven by the permit in the Apalachicola.
Yeah. Rob, any last thoughts about the ruling or about what this bill would do?
I think it's worth pointing out that it's not the first time people have explored for oil in that area. I think it's something like 70 wells have been drilled. I think I saw that in the Riverkeeper communication, and they were all empty. It's not geologically an area that is promising for oil.
Right. They've all come up dry. There were a few wells, I think a total of 4, that were pretty proximal to the current site that did drill down at least far enough to reach the Smackover Formation, which was the touchstone for this particular permit, where they were convinced there was absolutely going to be a supply of oil. So it's not like this is the first effort to go find it. There have been other efforts that have all come up dry. The likelihood was low in the first place. Even their own experts, never put it any higher than 50%. And Riverkeeper's experts put it well under between 15 and 30% in terms of likelihood of success.
Wow. All right. Well, we will see what happens with this bill. And I know Apalachicola Riverkeeper will stay busy.
Yesterday was quite active.
I bet it was. All right, thank you. We've been speaking with WFSU Ecology blog producer Rob Diaz de Villegas and Craig Diamond, a board member with Apalachicola Riverkeeper. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And here's an update. Since this segment was produced, the House has passed the oil drilling bill amended by the Senate, which sends it to the governor. He can sign it, let it take effect without his signature, or he can choose to veto it. I'm Gina Jordan.